Happy Repeal Day and welcome to your Daily Detroit for Monday, December 5th, 2022. I'm Jer Stays. If you didn't know, it was on this day in 1933 that Prohibition ended at 5:32 p.m. And here's a fun stat. At one point in the 1800s, Detroit had one saloon for every 13 residents. Anyway, today's episode is about history, design, and bringing a place back to life. I have a pair of guests from Detroit-based Concetti Design to talk about a recently completed project, the Murray, a set of townhomes of sorts from more than a century ago that are now completely full with tenants. There are areas of town with a lot of new activity, whether it's residential or commercial, and the owners, residents, and developers of those spaces are more and more turning to interior design services. Concetti has done a number of spaces you might know, from a redo of Good Cakes and Bakes, the Film Lab, Coriander Kitchen, as well as a number of residences. And after that conversation, I'll share some stories you should know around town. Let's get started.
If you ever get the feeling you're gonna fade away, I could be there behind you.
So joining me virtually, Concetti CEO and Principal Designer Rachel Nelson. Hello.
Hey there.
Also, Taylor Morgan, Concetti's lead designer and head of marketing. Welcome.
Hi.
All right, so let's get into this. The Murray, a project in the Hubbard Farms neighborhood. It was built, I believe, around 1915, if I'm correct?
That is a true statement. 1916. Yep, right around there.
All right. And this is a project, as it is always when it comes to historic rehab, trying to make it go up to modern standards, that had a lot of challenges and also solutions. And one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with the both of you is that putting together projects anywhere, but putting together projects of this kind of complexity, doing it in a neighborhood, having to work with partners, having a lot of moving pieces, and having it come out looking good is quite the accomplishment, but also takes a lot of work. So I want to give listeners a little look under the hood around this. So first off, can you talk a little bit about what Concetti is so you can share kind of the perspective that you bring to the conversation?
So Concetti was founded in 2014. We are an interior design strategy studio, and we specialize in both residential and commercial design. We are located here in the Island View neighborhood, and we really aim to partner with each of our clients as co-creators to express their genuine self, whether it be at home, a brand that we're aiming to convey, and make sure that the piece of the environment that we're able to create together is a catalyst for that. So we really are the bridge between brand and the built environment. But I would say what really makes us unique is our core promise is to help people express their genuine selves. It's not about us and trends and all the things. We really take the time to get to know who we're designing for, what are their goals, and make sure that we bring our creativity and arsenal of vendors and years of experience to create a solution that really captures it.
The Murray is a multifamily development, but it is not a new build. When you first got this assignment for Concetti, what were your first thoughts?
So when we first got to the building, it had stood vacant for 20 years. As you can imagine, being a property in Detroit that's sitting vacant, it wasn't to the standard that we would have wanted to have people living in at the time. In fact, kids located right near school, and the kids of the school had reached out to the mayor and said that they didn't really like walking past it every day getting to school.
Right.
So we love that the mayor, as well as Emory at Real Estate Interests, took on this project and brought us in so that we could really help beautify the space.
And when you talk about beautifying the space, this isn't really about picking a specific pillow or a different item. This isn't decoration. This is design. Can you kind of delineate that for listeners who might not know the difference?
Yes. Oh, you're pulling at my heartstrings, sir. So we always like to make the comparison of, a cute pillow and a great paint color. That's decoration. Design is a way of problem solving. It is a way of getting creative and making sure that we are making decisions towards solving for pain points. And so what we mean by that is, especially when we talk about the Murray here, it was really taking the time to understand what the building's history was, what are some of the pain points, what's the vision moving forward, but how can we educate ourselves about the neighborhood, about the history, and find inspiration in there so that we can take this beautiful building that has been sitting vacant and return it to its glory and really make it a part of the community. So it was way more about the partnership and about honoring the vision and making design solutions that are what we call human-centric design. And a lot of times people think, oh my gosh, human-centric, what does that mean? And simply put, it means putting the people first. So really focusing in on what is the human experience we are aiming to support here. So for us, that was really taking the time to envision what a resident's journey would look like, where they walk in the front door, what type of modern amenities do we need that maybe this historic building didn't have previously. And one of the biggest things is, kitchen and bathrooms and storage and TV outlets.
Yeah, I want to ask about that because I am a fan of old buildings. I've lived in a number of old buildings, and how we lived nearer to the turn of the century, 1915, 16 in this case, stayed in the North End. That house is from 1922, so it's 100 years old. Things are different now. So what are some of the specific challenges you had to wrestle with?
Well, I think what's awesome is we talk about the fact that this building sat vacant for 20 years, but we were brought in at the point where it was still vacant. We were still able to look at how we could take this 7-unit complex and move walls, create electrical plans that would convert it into a 12-unit building.
Mhm.
So it was more than just looking at the finishes. We were able to look at where people were going to use their TV in the bedroom, like we said, or what a cabinet layout would look like that was going to honor a more modern type of experience in the kitchen than what we had previously in maybe an apartment that was 7 units, but weren't broken up efficiently for today's use.
One might think that turning it into more units might be a little bit more restrictive. Do you know the idea behind turning it to more units and how that kind of worked together, how that was split up?
I don't know if we can speak exactly to why it went from 7 to 12, but one thing that the developer was focusing on was making sure that there was units available at multiple price points. So there were units that were available for someone that was at a lower income bracket all the way to something that was an end unit that had really amazing finishes. And so giving them more units allowed them to service more people in the neighborhood, I think was really the main focus.
And Hubbard Farms is a longstanding neighborhood in the city of Detroit, a lot of longtime residents, but also an area that's been seeing investment as of late. If people don't know, that's outside of downtown, kind of southwest-ish, if I could best describe it. And so how does that work with the community go? You were talking about partnerships. This is definitely a change for that community. I'm sure some definitely welcomed a building being used after 20 years, but also change is change.
I definitely agree with that. I feel like that what was really, really important is that we paid homage to what it used to be. So we weren't here to put up an eyesore. It was really already in existence. And so we really wanted to make sure, like when choosing the mailboxes and door colors and really making sure the exterior choices were going to be something that played into what was always, I shouldn't say always, it's a 100-year-old building, but it has been there for the last 100 years. And so I think it was a really, although change, it was, I hope, a welcome change because it was really just kind of loving on a landmark that has been there for 100 years. And it's always nice when you can actually start to see, like to this day, it is fully leased out, which is really, really exciting. It's at full capacity. So I definitely think it had a really great response. The other thing that's really important to us was we wanted to make sure that we weren't just whitewashing the building. And I mean that quite literally. On the interior, we weren't going to do all white cabinets with white walls and white countertops. And, that can tend to be something you see in especially like larger cities. And, it was great partnering with Emery Matthews of Real Estate Interest because he really wanted to make sure we didn't lose the heart and that we made sure we never lost sight of this is supposed to be home for people. And so how do we create a home if we don't know who's going to live there?
We built this persona for the building that was something that was honoring both the building and the historic character of the building itself, but also being cognizant of the current neighborhood and the people that live there. So that everyone that was living there in the past, although they probably won't see it, but people that were living there in the past, as well as people that are surrounding the building now, feel as though they're like represented and they can see themselves in the space.
Agreed. It definitely had like a very diverse neighborhood demographic. And especially if you look at it over the past 100 years, it's like, how do we honor the original roots and how do we make sure it feels relevant for the neighborhood today?
Well, and I think about little details in a place like this. So I'm looking at some of the pictures and I noticed the kitchen. Like one of the kitchens I'm looking at has an island. That kind of thing didn't exist really that often in 1915, you know? And so having to incorporate that and even thinking about plumbing things like that, right? Like in a more modern house, it's more expected where there might be a sink in an island, right? And there'd be setups for that. But that kind of design kind of has to flow through not just the exterior stuff, but when it comes to the interior and the infrastructure of a building has to be updated to accommodate all this, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we went to great lengths. We walked the space with the construction company, with the developer, and went room by room and marked everything out on the floor. And the value of that is experiencing the space in our physical bodies as a human. And I know that sounds so silly and so literal, but when you're just working on paper, sometimes you lose that. So walking through the space and saying, when I walk in the room, I'm going to turn my lights on here. The only wall in this room to put the headboard is here. Let's make sure we have an outlet on either side for, the nightstands. Well, if the bed's facing this way, then, a TV is likely going to go here. Let's make sure there's an outlet there. So great consideration was taken to make sure that the mechanicals were placed in a manner that was going to serve the future residents. And same thing when it came to the kitchen. How do we maximize it? Everyone wants a large kitchen. They want to open to the living room. And we have to make sure that we were honoring a lot of the restrictions around it being a historical property. So working with Shelter Studio, the architect, we were able to really collaborate on how do we make sure that we are going to stay within the restrictions needed and offer these modern amenities.
Part of that too is all the details. So one thing I'll mention right here are things like the stairways, where you've got some scroll work on them, things like that. How challenging was it to kind of integrate some of those original details into the modern era, if you will? And looking at the photos of this thing, it's not like you go in there and it's this like 1920 on the outside, 1980 on the inside. It's like very, very appropriate for its time. It makes sense and it all goes together. How was it blending those older elements and the newer ones?
I think it's shocking, but it really was easy because there was so many elements that were beautiful from the past. And it just came down to taking the care to make sure that we preserved them and then made decisions that were going to emphasize their beauty. Typically, you'll see moldings painted white. That's like the natural thing that you would go to, like trim work or staircases. Those will be a bright white because it's clean. But we know doing something with a little bit of a higher gloss and black is going to make it more striking. And it's going to point out some of the inherent beauty that came with the natural details. So yeah, it was easy because we were given the pieces to make the decisions that were going to honor the traditional gifts that we were given by the building.
We were inspired by them.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, oh man, we got to incorporate this. It was like, oh my gosh, what a beauty this is. And how do we create a design solution? How do we make decisions that surround it to actually elevate these historic elements?
Yeah, I think in that same entry that you're speaking of, you see the scroll and the staircase, and obviously the wallpaper that was added. That was new, but we took inspiration from that scroll and the staircase and worked with Detroit Wallpaper Company. They're a local wallpaper company that's amazing, to create this wallpaper with custom colorways that reflected the palettes we developed for the building. And so it was the modern new wallpaper that was inspired by the things of the past. And that's really how you're kind of able to bridge the gap between today and yesterday, is just honoring and bringing in new pieces that are still relevant.
Well, a couple thoughts on that. I think first off, I'm so glad that you didn't just go with like a grayish
Same.
that doesn't really honor the space. I see a lot of developers do that kind of thing. And it hurts my heart because there's all these things that you can be inspired by. I really think that when you go into a space, whether it be a house, a retail space, anything like that, you need to let it talk to you and kind of honor what it's telling you as part of its history, things like that. And people use colors back then. People forget that colors were a thing. Like, just because the photos were black and white does not mean that there were not colors around.
Oh my gosh, that's such a good point. Yeah. And like taking the time to like actually research what colors were being used around 1915, and like that was also a part of the conversation. And do they feel relevant today? And so just really making choices that honored these really cool, unique, historic elements, but were still relevant today. And like one of the conversations we had, we left brick exposed in the units where we could. And, it was like of conversation, like, ooh, is that a good thing? And it was like, yes, it's such a good thing because we have this design solution, this persona of tenant that we are looking to attract, one who loves Detroit, one who loves history, one who wants to walk into a space and it feel like home. And I think that was the coolest thing, again, working with real estate interests, was they never lost sight of, I don't want to lose the character. I want to turn the dial up on the character. And I think it speaks volumes, like even in all of the vestibules, each unit has its own like vestibule, taking the time and the care to work with our design team here to furnish those spaces. And we went to antique stores and mixed with new and found some really cool art pieces and made sure that it wasn't like you're just walking into an echoey vestibule. You're walking into your home. They feel homey. They're all designed to a T, which felt really great that they took the time to invest in things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, hats off to Emery. He goes so far as one of his visions was that there would be a signature scent. And he was like, what is the person that's going to be walking into the space? What do they want to smell? What would this building smell like? In the most positive way, but he has a thing plugged in to the vestibule of each unit so that when you walk in, scent is one of the biggest memory triggers. Mm-hmm. So when you walk in, you get the familiar scent of home. And that was something that he focused on early on, which really allowed us to take full advantage of our process of leading into the visual aesthetics of everything and how we were going to honor things visually, because he was thinking from the beginning of this like holistic human experience when you walk into the spaces.
I think part of choosing to live in Detroit is being part of that community and history. And part of that, and obviously not all of it, but one part of it is that architecture, because there are buildings like the Murray that you cannot get those in too many other places in Michigan, to be very honest. It's a special kind of property.
Totally agree with that.
I agree. And I think it's amazing because being from Detroit, everyone being local to Detroit, we have this appreciation for the beauty that is inherent to the city. And so the fact that Emery came to a local Detroit design firm to create a space that honored Detroit was really beautiful. Like there's talented designers everywhere, but it feels so good when you can design for the city that you know and love to create spaces that are a reflection of that city.
Mm-hmm.
I think people can sense that. So let's talk about that locality in another way. One of the things is that you are seeing a lot of strength in the Detroit market overall for new things, for developments, for rehabs, all that. Even with recent real estate trends, Detroit has continued to be a strong market. How are you seeing that from Concetti's point of view and opportunities for you all as a local business?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great observation and definitely a true statement, because we are getting inquiries from clients who are moving to Detroit, which is really, really great. And we have been seeing a lot of people, even local residents, who have been purchasing new properties. I definitely feel like for us, one of the things that we love more than anything is helping people through that process, because it's more than, hey, I bought this house. What color do I paint the wall? For us, we go as far as, you're moving from where to where. Okay, great. Have we inventoried your existing furniture? I want photos. I want dimensions. I want to make sure we measure every nook and cranny of your new space, that we're strategic before you move, that we have thought through what furniture goes where, sourced additional pieces that can fit. And so we really work with our clients, even I'm getting into the nitty gritty of the furniture process, but even before that, we really take the time to get to know people, people what inspired the move? Why are you relocating? What are your goals around this? And so we really aim to be that safe place, that true partner for our clients to make sure that they're not the only ones having to hold all these pieces. That's really tough. And so we really aim to make it as smooth as possible as they are looking into new spaces. And it can be residential, it can be commercial, because we work with a lot of small businesses in Detroit.
Mm. And so what are you seeing are some of the trends in this?
It's so interesting when people ask about trends, because something that we challenge all of our clients to do is really ignore them and focus on what's making you happy.
Yeah.
And so what I do think is really cool about working for clients specifically within the city limits of Detroit is we ask a lot of clients, like, what brings you joy in this space? Like, what do you want to feel when you walk in this space?
What do holidays look like?
Yeah,
what does entertaining look like? What is after a long day of work, what space are you walking into? How does it feel?
Yeah. And it's been really interesting for the clients that live in Detroit. There's things said like, I just want to be able to appreciate the view. So how do we take the view of the city and bring it into their space? Or I just want to honor the city that I love. And so we take like inspiration of their family's history in Detroit and bring it into their space. So it's really less of a focus on what's trending at the moment, because something else is going to be trending later. And it's instead a focus on like, what do you love about living? If we're in Detroit, what do you love about living in Detroit? What do you want to feel when you're living in Detroit? And how do we extrapolate that feeling into a physical space for you?
We get excited. We get passionate. I was gonna say it makes it a true reflection of you. Your space is an opportunity for self-reflection. So what do you want to come home to at the end of the day? That's why we're called Concetti. It means concepts in Italian. And it's all about how do we extrapolate this person, this life, this family, this brand, this business into the built environment in a way that's not like, here's a gallery wall of my family. Okay, like how do we extrapolate that feeling and just make sure that we are creating spaces that are a true and genuine, authentic expression of people?
One thing I'm thinking about, just as you're saying this, is that this is a little different than I think some people's perception of folks who come into the city. Because if you're going to spend the time to work with people like you and do this kind of care, this strikes me that these businesses, these people, they're looking to put roots here. Is that right? Is that the right thing that I'm kind of triangulating here?
Yes, we're smiling ear to ear. I've literally been so proud and excited with some of the new clients that we're able to work with that say, I just kind of fell in love with Detroit. And I'm like, yeah, you did.
Yeah. And I think people of all ages too. We're seeing people that are looking to establish a home in Detroit to age in place. We're looking at people that are a little bit younger and have just bought their first apartment, but they want to invest in it because they plan to be here for a long time. We're seeing people that have an established career and have chosen to move back to Detroit and are enjoying the best parts of their lives and they have the money to do so in Detroit. So it really, I mean, the ages range, but the mission is really the same. They're like, we want to be here because this is where we feel good. And it's an honor that they're choosing us to create that space for them.
Well, and it seems like, because you've got a growing business around this, that this is something that's on the uptick, eh?
Absolutely. I think you can attribute a ton of things to that. But at the end of the day, when creating Concetti, we asked ourselves, how do we do design differently? And so it was really taking the time to do some market research, to understand the pain points of the industry, and to make sure that we created a unique offering that addressed these pain points. And it really comes down to one, people want to be seen and heard. Of course, we all want to be seen and heard. So really holding space for our clients, going deep in the creative process with them and having a participatory experience. And, the second piece to that is, design can feel intimidating and confusing. And so having an approach to design, we have a 3-phased approach to design that is easy to follow. It's a lot going on in there, but it's like, hey, we're in phase 1, we're in phase 2. Here are our goals. This is what you're going to see. And then lastly, it's actually getting them to the finish line. When doing market research, I was amazed at how many people said, well, I worked with a designer and I got, I got the plan, but I had to execute it, or I got the furniture, but I never knew how to stage it. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So we really aim to go to the finish line with our clients. So we do entire staging days. We're there to make sure whether it's residential or commercial, we're hanging the art on the wall, we're staging the shelves, we're making sure everything is just right, and that we really are that partner for people to get to the finish line. So it is being well received, and it really is something we are so grateful and proud of the work we get to do.
Well, and if people want to know more, where can they go?
You can find our website at concetti.studio. That's not concetti.studio.com, just concetti.studio. And then we're also on Instagram at concetti.studio as well.
All right. Well, Rachel Nelson, the Concetti CEO and principal designer, as well as Taylor Morgan, lead designer and head of marketing, thank you so much for your time on Daily Detroit.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Funding to help keep the Q-Line streetcar free to ride is coming together in the Michigan legislature. The $5 million annual subsidy through 2039 is tied to a package of bills to fund Huntington Place, the convention center. This would mean a major source going forward for funding of the 3.3-mile route would be hotel and liquor taxes. The funding is overwhelmingly supported by the Republican-controlled state legislature that's now in lame duck session as Democrats take control of all elected branches of state government next year. Also in streetcar news, the Q-Line says that service will be suspended through Monday due to a downed electrical wire. There's no word on when service would resume. The Oakland County Prosecutor's Office said on Sunday that a 35-year-old Dearborn man was arrested and charged with 2 counts of ethnic intimidation. This is after an anti-Semitic incident at Temple Bethel in Bloomfield Hills on Friday that was widely circulated on social media. Photos and numerous eyewitness reports show a man making anti-Semitic and racist threats at children, parents, and workers at the preschool and synagogue. The suspect will be held at the Oakland County Jail until arraignment. The city of Detroit paid a whopping $32 million this fiscal year in lawsuit payouts, reports Bridge Detroit. Although 4 of the 5 cases involved the Detroit Department of Transportation, things like bus accidents, the vast majority of the money going out the door was to settle claims with the Detroit Police Department. The city is self-insured, meaning that when a judgment is issued, it comes directly out of taxpayer funds. It's raising calls for better employee training and lawsuit avoidance. I will put a link in the show notes. Some housekeeping things. Heard the feedback to do a non-booze focused event, so I'm thinking about doing a coffee meetup in January. I'm going to put a poll up on our newsletter today, dailydetroit.substack.com, if you don't get it already, on if Saturday or Sunday works best for you. Second, our next round of glasses is coming together to get out the door. The design will be similar to our window stickers. I am excited to get that dealt with and have more of those on hand. Feedback, as always, dailydetroit@gmail.com. With that, thank you so much for listening. So much more ahead this week. I'm Jer Stays. Remember that you are somebody, and I'll see you around Detroit.